Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Porter. I'm a mental health counselor, a psychotherapist, licensed in the state of Florida. I happen to practice in the town of Gainesville, Florida. So if you live in this area, feel free to give me a call, look me up on the internet, text me is just as easy, and set up a time. However, I also like to do a little video series, and it's been a long time coming. I think it's been months or very many weeks since I've done a video, because I just haven't had the energy or time to do it. But today I decided to take a little time and energy to go ahead and make a video. Try to make it under 10 minutes if I can. This time it's about something I may have mentioned briefly in other places that I've made recordings. So other videos you may have watched may mention this subject. But it's almost about a form of perfectionism. And it has to do with the fact that with the intro of Eastern philosophies into the West, there has been apparently a new promise of heaven on earth, bliss within our lifetime, as a state that we get to by acceptance of the here and now, of reality, of not overthinking, and not being always in the mind, those kind of things. You may have heard some of these things. A lot of these are very mystical. At some point you just realize who you actually are, and it is you are the one unified creator and creation. You're the universe and all that. Those kind of elements enter into that dialogue. And actually, some types of this mysticism have existed in probably many religions throughout the centuries. You can find it in certain interpretations of Christianity, certain versions of Islam, and also anybody's allowed to create their own philosophy and idea about the universe, and it comes up over and over again for many people. It's very popular right now, but I think it's, for example, well, I just think it's a mixed bag, but I think it's not something that I want to throw out of hand. So the concept as I talk about it is, one phrase I've heard is trying to have equanimity in all circumstances. And what that means is that we can't control the outside world. The one thing we have hope of controlling is ourselves. Now that right there isn't perfectionism, but it gets to a place where people say that if they've meditated long enough, if they've learned enough to shrug off worrying about the past and worrying about the future, that at some point they come to realization, enlightenment, awareness, or awakening, and they walk in eternal bliss from that moment on, or just feel pretty steady in all situations. You get into a car wreck, you're feeling relatively the same as you would feel if you just won the lottery. There's even an old story about a man who, I think how it works is, he got a free horse or something, and his friends said, "Wow, you're so lucky." The guy says, "Maybe." The next day, his son is riding on the horse, and the horse throws him, and the son gets severe injuries, let's say. And the guy and his friends and neighbors say to him, "You're so unlucky." And he says, "Well, maybe." And then the next day, this is set in ancient times, the army comes marching through, recruiting every young man they can on their way, and they go to ask about his son, and they look at him and they say, "Oh, the kid has got broken bones everywhere. We can't take him." They pass through, and the guy's neighbors come along and say, "Oh, you're so lucky, they didn't take your son." And the guy says, "Well, maybe." And the idea there is this man is showing wisdom and sort of remains steady through all situations, which I think we can get to a level of. I just don't know that I've met anybody who's ever gotten there. I would not want to talk to people about equanimity or good emotional management, good emotion regulation, or building a good relationship with your emotional self with a sense of perfectionism, because that easily sets so many people up for failure. You can probably look at yourself or other people you've met who do feel like failures because they just don't feel as good at managing themselves and managing life as other people. And so I feel like making it sound possible or making it sound too easy to have a state like that where you basically handle anything, like even Steven, I'm good to go. I know who I am. I live within my own integrity. Nothing phases me too far. I'm open with my emotions, but that doesn't mean that I am lost in the illusion of fear and vulnerability and whatever, that you're above it all. If that's the goal that we set up, we may have a lot of disappointment. However, I'm also ever optimistic. I'm a therapist, and I have a lot of people that come to me with personal difficulties. And even as I think a relatively well-adjusted guy, I have a lot of personal difficulties that I'm still struggling through. And so what I've learned is to compare oneself to an ideal that just makes you feel like crap isn't helpful. Nevertheless, setting your sights on something that you might want to achieve over a lifetime, I think that might be okay, because we don't know what we're truly fully capable of. And there are many arguments against that. You will see that many people die with their horrible habits, their horrible attitudes, their overwhelming sadness or loneliness or whatever. And we might want to say, well, I'm no better than them, or maybe that just has to happen to some people. And so I get that. So there's a lot of confusion and a lot of room for thought and even discussion and argument about this. But I would say I never give up on anybody, even if they're on their deathbed or close to their deathbed, because I am human. I am ignorant. I do not know what's going to happen tomorrow or in the next hour. So I always hold open a hope that I and others can make that next step. But each step, I think, is rewarding. And then we can have some very rough times if we're being too perfectionist, or if we're just disappointed that our next step didn't automatically lead to that next higher step in our development, to that next higher step in our development in an easy way. I think there are a lot of ups and downs along the way. So I also think a lot of people fake being what you call enlightened or having equanimity in all circumstances, because there's tons of pressure to fake it. In the American society and in societies all over the world, it's a source of shame. It's actually non-normative to show who you really are and how you really feel. So what you're going to see is a lot of people out there that look like they've got it so much more together than you do. Phooey. It's baloney. They're freaking out inside too. I have days where I'm freaking out inside and that sort of thing. But still, my efforts have been worth it. I've come to different places and I've landed on a different plateau here and there. But there's all kinds of difficulty along the way. So I'm coming to the conclusion that there has to be some kind of difficulty along the way, until maybe there isn't. So maybe there is a final plateau that we can reach. And what does that say about the people who haven't reached it? Well, I don't believe we know enough about what happens when we die to answer that question. Some people believe in reincarnation and say that people have an eternal set of new chances until they finally attain that state we're talking about. So I want to admit that maybe it doesn't exist, and I do believe that a lot of people fake it, and what that does is make it harder for all of us to quest after it. But I do believe in questing after it, or questing after something that you legitimately believe is important enough to quest after. Because I tend to think that we are on this planet for some reason. Nobody can necessarily dictate to you what that reason is. So you have to find purpose and meaning in your life to dictate to yourselves, to yourself. And you are just as much of an authority on that as anybody else might be. Although I do believe it is helpful to get some feedback. So back to finding equanimity in all circumstances. I've been practicing all kinds of mindfulness and meditation for a long time, and I want to tell you something that happened to me the other day. Totally disoriented, totally overwhelmed, not being able to come up with a meaning for life, knowing inside of me that I get into these states sometimes, and then I come out of these states, though. I continued to do what I needed to do. I actually consulted with my wife and talked to her about how insecure I was feeling, and she's often very good with that. And then I'm often very good with that with myself. But I was in such a state that was, I think, in many ways, not really changeable. So, people talk about equanimity in all outward circumstances, but I also talk about equanimity with all inward circumstances. So get this, I'm saying we can feel okay no matter how we feel. Whoa. And I believe that to some degree because I've had this experience several times, including last week, where I was feeling terrible. But I was thinking to myself, how do I make myself feel good? And then suddenly a thought came to me, wait a minute, I don't need to go through all that trouble of trying to make myself feel good. Why? I don't have to feel obligated to feel good. Just being me is enough. Just being Jim is enough. Just being alive is enough. Just existing is enough. And when I had that thought, suddenly it's like some part of me felt fine about how horrible I felt. And I did continue to feel horrible, but some part of me started to feel just fine about how I felt. It is hard to understand what's going on there. It could be, if you're a mystical minded person, that my soul felt okay about how the incorporeal me felt. Or it could be that my prefrontal cortex just felt or understood that it was okay for me to feel like crap because the feeling like crap is just a bunch of hormones and neural firings. I don't know. But I do know that these things we advise people to do, that we help people to do, and that people come up with for themselves, these healing practices, these self-care practices, they have an effect over time. And I think, I recommend highly finding sets of practices, never giving up, and continue to try, because you don't know how far you can get with this sort of work. And also, like I said, there's some magical moments along the way. I don't know what's next for me in this, but I'm real interested in finding out. And this is Jim Porter signing off.